On November 24, 1971, a man in a business suit walked onto a plane with a bomb in his briefcase and walked off with $200,000 that belonged to someone else. But here's what the FBI won't tell you. D.B Cooper wasn't the criminal mastermind legend made him out to be. He was a con artist who exploited one fatal flaw in how airlines operated, a flaw so obvious that when you hear it, you'll wonder why it took a skyjacker to expose it. Exhibit 1: The boarding procedures. In 1971, you didn't need a ticket to board a domestic flight, just a boarding pass printed at the gate. No ID check. No background scan. No photograph on file. A man could buy a ticket under an assumed name, walk straight onto a commercial airliner, and nobody would know who he really was. On that November afternoon, a man calling himself Dan Cooper, the media would later rename him D.B., approached Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305 from Seattle to Tacoma. He carried a briefcase. He wore a dark suit, sunglasses, and a black tie. He looked ordinary. That was the point. Exhibit 2: What he claimed to have. Once airborne, Cooper opened his briefcase and showed the flight attendant what he said was a bomb, a device with wires, a battery, and what looked like dynamite taped together. The flight crew had never been trained to handle this. There was no protocol, no emergency manual, nothing but fear and improvisation. Now here's where the con becomes clear. Nobody, not the crew, not the pilots, not the FBI who would later examine every detail, could ever prove what was actually in that briefcase. No one ever saw it detonate. No residue was ever recovered. Cooper's entire leverage rested on a bluff so simple it's almost elegant. He claimed to have something deadly, and because no one had ever encountered a skyjacker before, everyone believed him. Exhibit 3: The ransom. Cooper demanded $200,000 in $20 bills, not in a suitcase or a bag, but in a canvas money bag. He wanted the bills unmarked and unrecorded. Again, the airlines had no playbook for this. They complied. Within hours, the money was loaded onto the aircraft. No questions asked. The skeptic's question: why would any airline pay a ransom for a bomb threat when they could call law enforcement? Because Cooper had already proven he understood their system better than they did. He knew there were no air marshals on domestic flights. He knew the plane could land without incident. He knew that $200,000 was cheaper than a negotiation with the federal government. But the con had an expiration date. Once the money was aboard and the plane descended into Portland, Oregon, Cooper made his final move. He lowered the rear stairs, put on a parachute, and jumped into the night sky, disappearing into darkness and rain with $200,000 in cash. Exhibit 4: What happened next? The FBI launched the largest investigation in its history at that time. Thousands of agents scoured the Pacific Northwest. They interviewed suspects, they followed leads, and they found almost nothing. No parachute, no body, no confirmed sightings, just questions and speculation. Here's what the legend missed. In 1980, a young boy found $5,800 of Cooper's ransom money buried near the Columbia River. The serial numbers matched. It proved Cooper had existed. It also proved he'd landed somewhere he could bury cash, which meant he survived the jump. But it answered nothing about who he was or where he went. The counterargument is seductive. Maybe Cooper died on impact. Maybe he landed in rough terrain. Maybe the money discovery was coincidence. But consider the facts. He jumped into a dark night, in unfamiliar territory, carrying $200,000 in a canvas bag. Most people in that position don't survive. Yet someone did leave that money behind deliberately or by accident, we can't know. Over 50 years, dozens of suspects have been named. Richard Floyd McCoy Jr. committed a similar hijacking months later. Robert Rackstraw claimed he was Cooper. Dan Cooper, yes, that name really existed, lived in Canada. Richard Lepowich confessed on his deathbed. None of them held up under scrutiny. None of them had the evidence to prove it. So what's the real con here? Not Cooper's scheme, that was straightforward extortion wrapped in bluff. The con is the mythology. We've turned a man who exploited a system failure into an outlaw folk hero. We've built him into something larger than life because the alternative, that he was ordinary, that he succeeded through luck and audacity rather than genius, is less satisfying. Exhibit 5: The real victim. Northwest Orient Airlines lost $200,000, yes, but the actual cost was systemic. After Cooper's jump, the aviation industry rewrote every rule. Stairs were locked. Air marshals boarded flights. ID requirements tightened. The security apparatus we know today, the checkpoints, the screening, the surveillance, exists partly because one man in a suit proved how broken the old system was. The skeptic's final verdict: D.B. Cooper wasn't a criminal genius. He was a con man who understood human psychology better than the institutions around him. He knew fear paralyzes decision-making. He knew that people comply when they believe the threat is real. And he knew that a briefcase with the right appearance could be worth $200,000 in pure bluff. Whether he lived or died in the Columbia River forests, whether he was a disgruntled airline employee or a career criminal, whether he buried that money deliberately or by accident, none of it matters. What matters is this: the greatest unsolved skyjacking in American history wasn't unsolved because it was complicated. It was unsolved because it was simple, and we couldn't accept that. The case remains open. The FBI still accepts tips. And somewhere in the archives of aviation history, a man in a dark suit reminds us that the greatest cons aren't the ones with the most moving parts. They're the ones that exploit what we already believe to be true. Subscribe so you don't miss the next case where the real con wasn't the crime. It was how we chose to remember it.